G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy podcast. Today we are talking about the most popular players who you should lock into your side and who can you go against. Let's go!
Just done it from nowhere. Oh, kicked the goal from inside the centre. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty. Teddy. Petrarca. Oh, wow. How good is that? The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy podcast. I'm your host Mitch Casey and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. Talking some popular players today with, as always, my good mate Luke. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Big day today, actually. I got a tweet out real early in the morning. The Oxlongs made it onto Twitter.
They're up there.
Some positive feedback.
Loud and proud for the world to see.
Yeah, I got...
Let it all hang loose.
It was. Like, I copped a little bit of flack for getting Doc into the team since the previous podcast, which I was prepared for. But it's like a tidal wave of... Yeah, I saw that, eh? It's a tidal wave of Doc supporters out there. And
it seems to be growing a lot at the moment.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll probably touch on him today.
That's it. We kind of talked about it last pod, but he's in that category with Dunkley a little bit. It's like go against him at your own peril. So,
yeah.
I mean, I keep saying it, the team will change so many times between now and the start of the season, but at the moment, Doc's in there with the boys.
He's in there, yeah. So check us out on Twitter. Obviously, Luke Rojo17, Ball Boys Fantasy for me. We've recently crossed the threshold of 300 subscribers on YouTube,
nice.
So thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed. Bit of a lofty goal, but if we could get to 1,000 subscribers,
wow.
I think that would be just bloody awesome. So if you guys are listening along on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, would mean the world to us if you guys go and hit that subscribe button and keep supporting the videos that way.
Yeah. At the moment, the YouTube videos look a little bit like they've been shot on a potato, but
hopefully we've got some more better quality stuff.
We're working on that, so
see how we go.
Stay tuned.
But let's get stuck into these popular players. So basically, the theme of today's pod is going to be popular players and basically whether or not necessarily that if they're justified to be popular, but okay, we talk about points of difference a lot and pods, but sometimes the best point of difference is to actually avoid the popular pick that fails or the popular pick that disappoints. So
like a reverse pod.
Yeah,
kind of.
so sometimes it's the best way to go about. So say you didn't start with a Matty Rowell last season.
Yep.
He had that big first game, but very much a bit of a disappointment. Everyone had him in their team, so if you were the player that avoided him, then you probably got off to a better start than most. So a bit of points of difference going against the popular players, but obviously some of them, they're popular for a reason because they're good picks. So
that's it.
Trying to decipher between the two, and some of them, I guess, will just be playing a bit of devil's advocate and see how we go.
We'll go through a few players. We'll try our best to kind of steer clear of the rookies. They're a little bit
cash
of
cows.
They're an unknown at the moment, and most people are going to have those rookies.
So obviously,
and cash cows.
most
You
popular
kinda gotta have
player,
them.
Will Ashcroft. I think. Look, he's there named round one. You pick him because he's the gun rookie.
cash.
So for the most part, sticking clear the rookies, mostly focusing on the mid prices and premium. So starting at the top here, the most popular player in the premium department, Josh Dunkley, 52%.
Yeah,
the good looking man moving up to Queensland.
He is. He's getting that sun.
Hopefully he's surviving the heat so far because I'll tell you what, if you're not in Queensland right now, it is bloody hot.
Des said it's 7 o'clock at the time we're recording this, and I don't know if you can see, but I'm like sweating bullets. I hope Josh hasn't been scared off by the heat.
Hopefully he can still catch those marks, and the humidity doesn't throw him off too much.
A little bit of grippo should do him all right. But let's talk about him from a potentially going against him perspective. Now, the first thing I'll say on that topic is go against him at your peril.
Yeah.
I think I kind of mentioned it just then with Doc as well. And as expensive as Dunkley is, and it does in a way pain you to press that purchase button and spend all that money. But we know coming to a new team, he's going to be getting more midfield time. There's a chance where he just goes up and up and up, and he becomes unattainable, and then you're going, oh man, what do I do? So
I think Dunkley's a very. It sounds like it seems like the popular opinion. Obviously, he's the most popular player in the game. I think this one is sort of like a don't overthink it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Priced at 109, I think it is. I was asked on Twitter, like, what do we see the difference? And again, we're talking about Doc a lot early, but what's the difference we're seeing between Doherty and Dunkley?
Yep.
The difference to me is I'm much more confident with Dunkley as a captain option, number one. And number two, we have seen stretches with him in the past for sort of over half the season going at a 120 plus.
Yep.
He's going into what we expect to be a more friendly role with higher CBAs in a team where he's still not going to be a tag target. They're maybe not the most friendly fantasy team, but it's not a team where we've got concerns about coaching style and, all the Richmond, Collingwood, GWS sort of concerns. So I think he's going to be pretty comfortably the top forward. And when you have upside at that price and can be a captain option and you're by far the best player in your position, I think, just don't overthink it. And to me, I don't really see a great scenario to go against Dunkley because I think, like you said, he's going to be too hard to get in.
That's it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be betting against Dunkley. And I mean, I can see there'll be some people out there that do that and think, I can save some cash.
Good luck to you.
Oh, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Like I said, at your own peril, the bloke's an Adonis and he's a fantasy freak. And there's every chance he goes at 120.
Yeah, well, you don't have to contend with Bevo anymore. That can only mean good things.
It's all up. It's all up for dunks.
The next guy here, the next most popular player, which kind of surprises me a little bit here, Timmy Taranto, 47% owned by the Fantasy Classic comp.
You reckon it's that new club factor?
New club factor, obviously he's been a beast in the past. I think he's averaged 112 or even slightly more in the past.
Yeah.
Obviously going to a Richmond game style, maybe that hurts him, but again, price at 95. The idea or the expectation is going to be played predominantly through the midfield.
Yep.
People are not really being scared off by the Richmond game style. So I guess this one, maybe you could talk me into a little bit more of going against him if you're going to really run the narrative of Richmond's, poor scorers in the past and not being a fantasy-friendly team.
Yep.
I still think that of the forwards, he and Dunkley are probably the safest and most guaranteed to be tops in their line.
Yep.
And I do see upside for both of them. So for me, again, I'm probably not going to talk too strongly about going against him, but I can see more of an argument for Taranto just with that concern of Richmond's game style. And maybe he's not the absolute lock for 60-70% midfield time that we might be all expecting. Richmond does like to run a very versatile system and everyone has multiple roles and can switch between those roles game to game. So there is an argument that I can see that maybe the Taranto pick isn't as much of a slam dunk as we think.
Yep.
But saying that, he's in my side.
Yeah, so he's in my side as well. But I'm actually a little bit shocked that he's as high as 47%. I actually can see a world where you go against him only because there's like a buffet of forwards.
There's a lot of options.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
good point.
Any combination of forwards that you go with, the guy you leave out, that could end up being a win. So let's say you go with a forward line where you go Dunkley, Canelio, more Rosie or more Butters. If you're proved right by that Richmond system and the way that it strangles scoring sometimes, you could go against Taranto.
You've got a lot of other big guys.
That's it. You could go against him and you could have some certainty in some other players as well. So, I'm most likely to be picking him at this stage. But yeah, I can see a world where people could go against him.
Yeah, I can definitely see the world. I'm probably not advocating it for it, but yeah, you did have definitely right. Different to Dunkley, I don't necessarily think I would talk anyone out of, if someone said, I'm not going to have Dunkley, I'd be like, are you sure? Do you want to go over and think that a little bit? If someone said I'm not going to have Taranto, then I'm like, okay, all right, I can see that it could work out.
Yeah.
But look, maybe the only thing I think for Taranto this year is I maybe don't think that his ceiling might be quite as high as we've seen in the past, but I still expect him to have a pretty high floor. Just those tackle numbers and his ability to sort of be that first touch kind of a player, which Richmond does desperately need. I think that he's going to be a sort of reliable high floor. I don't necessarily think he's a captain option most weeks, so different to Dunkley. I think that's sort of... But again, he's more than 100k cheaper. So I think that, he is someone I'm pretty happy to have in my side. The next one here is, so move away from the forwards, and I want to have a bit of a lengthier discussion with this guy here because this is probably the first player on this popular list that I'm seriously considering not having on my side.
Yep.
Nick Daicos is owned in, I'll round up to 43%.
You might get hunted down for that statement, mate.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love him. He's a great young player. He's obviously destined for stardom in the AFL, but... Are we getting a bit too excited too early on a Nick Daicos with the lofty hopes that he's going to be there and around the top 6 defenders come the end of the season in his second season?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard not to be tempted by just how talented this kid is. So I think there's definitely, you have to take a step back and you have to distinguish between his just unbelievable AFL talent and then whether he's able to then continue that progression in fantasy scoring in his second year. So I'm with you, and I'm contradicting myself a little bit because he was the fellow that I said was going to be first picked in my team, but there have been a couple of times...
You said that on January 3. You have to lock that decision in, mate. Like, you can't stray from that.
I'm an absolute turncoat. But it's crossed my mind as well. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, maybe Daicos out. He's still in the team at the moment, and there's just this tidal wave of support for Daicos with good reason. He's a jet, and people have said it's the best rookie season ever. And there's a fair argument for that, but in terms of like what it means for our fantasy. Like you said, I think it's a very important thing to distinguish the player from the fantasy profile, if that makes sense. Because you can have players who are guns and really good in the AFL and be extremely impactful, but it doesn't always sometimes translate to fantasy scores because of tags, because of the way that they collect their scores. He's a guy that really does require a lot of possessions to get big ceiling scores. Like I've said before, he's not a huge tackler. He's playing in that halfback role. He's probably not going to be. Exactly,
second year, a lot of AFL talk is about second year blues. It's not something we talk about, coming from a fantasy basketball background. It's probably the opposite. So I don't know if I subscribe to the second year blues thing, but there might be something to it in terms of just being a bit more on other teams' radars. And the other thing is, like we said about the game style, this is a Collingwood team that we expect, they've brought in Tom Mitchell. We expect him to become like a sort of 110 guy. So you're adding all those fantasy points into the side that was already struggling, and then we're expecting Daicos to go another 10 points more. It's a lot to ask for a second-year guy.
Yeah, don't get it twisted. We're not saying that, in the future, Nick Daicos won't be an absolute, fantasy star. He will be, that's for certain. It's just a matter of whether you can, with confidence, say, in his second year, I'm backing him to be a top 6 defender, because he is in that no man's land at the moment. If anyone who's picking him is saying he's going to be a top 6 defender. You're not picking him as a stepping stone. You're not picking him as really like a value option. To be perfectly honest, you're locking him in as a top 6 defender. All that being said, he's still in my team, but I can definitely see a situation where people don't have him and then he comes out and he has a great season, but he just averages what he averaged last year. Yeah, which would be a great season for a second-year player.
I think so. Yeah. It's not as though but the problem is with fantasy, even if he has like what he did last year, that's a disappointing pick.
Exactly.
It's a great season in the AFL scheme of things, but it's a disappointing.
So
fantasy
you could bet
pick
against that, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think there's a serious option for it. And when I don't often do this for players when I'm deciding my starting squad, but when it's like those 50-50 calls and I'm not too sure of, I do also sometimes like to look at their starting draw as well. Okay. And I've had a look into Daicos' starting draw, and it actually looks a bit challenging from what I've seen. So first game of the season comes up against the reigning premiers in Geelong. Second game against Port Adelaide. Both of those have historically actually been tough matchups for defenders, especially. Okay. Richmond is a good matchup. Obviously, no tag is going to happen there. Defenders have done well in the past there. Brisbane Lions at the Gabba, again, can sometimes be a tough one for defenders specifically. And then he's got a back-to-back meeting with St Kilda and Essendon, both of which I think there is a big chance of a tag coming. St Kilda, obviously, they've got Ross the Boss in, a known tagging coach. Essendon did a lot of tagging with Caldwell last season, and I think might have even tagged him once or twice last season. They then have Adelaide, and then in round 8, they've got Sydney, who tagged him twice last season with Ryan Clark. So 3 tags in the first 8 rounds. A game against Geelong in round 1, a game against Port and Brisbane Lions, all are tough matchups for defenders. There's no Bulldogs, no. North Melbourne or Melbourne in there, which we know are good for defenders. Hawthorn are not till later in the season. So I see there a world where maybe he is someone that you could go against early in the season. Maybe he even loses a bit of prices early. You get him even cheaper, and then he rises.
So talk me through.
That's sort of my thoughts there.
So talk me through then. So in the scenarios where you're taking Daicos out of your team, talk me through how that restructure happens. Who comes in? Do you go with one less premium? Talk us through that.
It's a tough one, and it's one that I don't know if I have an answer right now because the defensive line is one that I've been struggling with. So I've been toying around with going sort of one premium and then straight down to like your mid prices in Elliot Yeo, Christian Salem as D2,
so you're thinking
3.
So Brayshaw and
going real cheap.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
Maybe it's going someone a bit more unique and someone else that I like, and an Isaac Cumming or a Hayden Young as sort of just that guy that I still think has a similar level of upside, but maybe has a higher floor, a bit more safe. Or maybe it's then spending up and going big and going like a Doherty at your D1, moving a Brayshaw down to D2. That obviously seems to be something today that I've not sort of liked the look of, just because it takes a lot of value out of a lot of other lines. But he is in that nice kind of price, and that's kind of what I think is tempting, because he's in that price where it doesn't feel like you're paying a whole lot. You think you could potentially have a top 6 player. But I just do think that maybe we're not all thinking of the potential downside of having a second-year player and expecting him to be that sort of top 6-ish kind of defender.
Yeah. We got those Daicos coloured glasses on a little bit, don't we?
Sometimes with this kind of thing, like a bit of group think, a bit of like that echo chamber comes around. A lot of the podcasts pump him up and that sort of thing. And he is a gun, but
he is,
it just sort of makes me pause a little bit. So
no, I think that those are good stats that you brought up, and you know, on the podcast, we're never trying to influence anyone to do anything. Just take what we have to say on board and kind of make your own decisions on it. But really great points, I think, that you bring up, Mitch. Yeah.
So let us know what your thoughts are regarding a Nick Daicos. Obviously, very popular player, the most popular defender, and he could be really good. But I'm also not too sure that he's just kind of come out and absolutely set the world on fire. I don't really see that, just because of the way that he needs those disposals to get like
and you also don't
I don't think he's going to hurt you if you don't go with him, if that makes sense.
He's not sneaking up on anyone this year either.
No,
Do you know what I mean?
He's on everyone's radar.
Yeah, every match prep that teams are doing prior to playing Collingwood, Daicos' name's going to be up there on the board. So yeah, interesting one.
Let's go on to the next one. We've got another forward, third forward, all above 40%. Connor Rozee, owned by 42% of the comp. Again, surprised me a little bit how high this guy is.
Yeah, okay.
780k. What is that price? I think that's a price at 93 or something like that. So
I got PTSD with
Connor Rozee. You started with him last year, but obviously had the big second half of the year. Moved into the midfield. I think from there he averaged about 100. If I pull up my stats here, and obviously had a big finish to the year as well. He is someone that we've sort of discussed between him and Zach Butters.
Well, that was what I was going to kind of say. If you go against Rozee, do you pick Butters, and it's just kind of nice and neat and tidy?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to do a lowly ownership podcast
He's
next
only
time,
6%
and he will definitely be on that show. So I think it's definitely a viable thing. So average 98 points after moving to the midfield. So that gives him 10 points of upside with the 60% CBA role. So I think high 90s, maybe the low 100s is sort of what we can expect from him. It's value for sure. But again, just surprises me that he's so highly owned when there are so many other good options in the forward line. Emilio, Dylan Moore, Zach Butters.
Do you think it's because of that price? Like if you're looking at all those players, he's the cheapest of them and potentially has great upside, so people kind of just go bang.
I do think so. Like he's obviously cheaper than Cogs, cheaper than Taranto, cheaper than Dylan Moore. Like all those other guys are kind of in that mix, and obviously if we all think that they have like a similar output, if it makes sense for your team and for you to get other lines up, then Connor Rozee is that kind of a guy. I also just worry about him as I know we sort of kind of touched on this in our Premium Forward podcast, but I think he actually is a genuine tag target for some teams just because of how damaging he is as kind of that hybrid forward midfielder archetype that seems to be the position that everyone wants in their team. You know, look, I'm not going to put him up there with the Petrarcas, Dustys, and those kind of types, but he obviously has that kind of a mould in him. And I think of all the midfielders in their team, he is the most damaging. And if they are going to tag someone, if I was the opposing coach, I would be trying to tag Connor Rozee personally.
Yeah, from a purely AFL perspective, he's the kind of guy that he's capable of racking them up, but every touch he has looks silky. It's effective. He can break lines. He's a good user by foot. He seems to have time and space. So those are the kind of guys, like you said, that do become tag targets. He's not just an accumulator that does nothing with it. I'm not 100% locked on Rosie. I reckon you could go against Rosie, and
I think
if you were going to
definitely go against,
if you were going to go against Rosie, I think it would pair nicely with some Butters. So
some Butters or maybe a Dylan Moore, my love child. So just
maybe a Dylan Moore.
Sneak him in there.
Mate, is he paying you? I reckon he might be giving you.
I think I saw someone else that showed him a bit of love on Twitter the other day.
Oh, okay.
DC of DC Caliber. So shout out to you, another Dylan Moore enthusiast.
He's got two of you on the books. A couple of underhanded payments.
So, but yeah, I think that like we said, there's other options in the forward line, and I will just finish on with Connor Rosie here. He does have a pretty low floor as well, even in a good midfield role. So after the midfield switch, which happened in round 5, he started with a 113 and a 119.
Yeah.
But then the next 4 weeks, he went 74, 67, 92, 65, all as a midfielder.
Gave me a 35 in round 1, I think.
That was not as a midfielder. 21.
I don't care where it was, Mitch. I was pissed.
Yeah, he had a 64 against Richmond as well.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's not a tag score there as well. So he has the tendency to still be able to go missing even in a midfield role. So there is a world where he maybe starts the season really quite poor. You know, if he has that four game stretch, you know, where he goes sort of 70s, 80s, like that's very disappointing. A lot of people didn't have him be able to get him really cheaply.
Definitely.
And when you're passing up another good option, you know, say you do have someone that goes bang from the start, that one could really hurt. So again, like a Nick Daicos, I am more in favour of going against him. And he is someone that I think he was on my team. I think he is still on my team at the moment, but he's definitely kind of the guy that if I want to change my structure, he kind of drops down to a mid-pricer and I get someone else up in a different line. So 42% for Connor Rosie, pretty high.
Then we have a couple of rookies in there, Wilmot and Phillips. We won't chat about those guys, but the next fella up is Canelio, owned at 34%.
34%,
Now,
another forward. This is the fourth forward. So 4 of the top 5 most owned players are forwards.
In terms of kind of saving some time here as well, the way that I would see you going against Canelio is just by restructuring with some of those really good value forwards that we've got to go. Obviously, the thing with Canelio that a lot of people are high on is the prospect of having a new coach come in there and him playing exclusively midfield time.
Yep.
And when he plays exclusively midfield time, it's hard to argue against his stats. When you have a new coach, there are there's
a few things, there are some question marks. It's not quite as clear cut as maybe some people want to think it is.
That's right, but talk us through. Would you bet against Canelio?
I think he's going to be up there in the top 6 forwards. I would argue against the upside that I think that some people say he has, and I will just say that at 871,000, he's the second most expensive forward. I do prefer some of those guys that are a little bit cheaper. I think that Taranto's going to potentially outscore him and do so at a cheaper starting price. You can spend 50,000 less and get a Dylan Moore. You could spend 90,000 less and get a Connor Rosie. So I think just based on the price that you're paying for him and what I expect him to do this season, I don't think he's going to be a bad pick, but I think that you could potentially use your money more wisely.
Yep.
And I guess there is still a risk that, say, GWS, there's always a lot of talk when you get a new coach coming in. The first season, they've got a license to do whatever the hell they want. You know, they're kind of... especially if they're obviously on a multi-year contract, they've kind of got free runs to experiment and try different things, especially if things don't go well, which I think that perhaps in the Giants... scenario, I think they're going to be in for a bit of a struggling season in terms of the wins and losses. So it wouldn't surprise me if they get off to a poor start that maybe Canelio is that guy that gets moved around being a more older player on their list. Maybe they get a few more of the younger guys in there, and it might not be quite as, nice as we thought in terms of his role. So I do think there is some downside. I don't think he's been in my team once so far this preseason.
Okay.
Look, I will continue to monitor it and see how he goes, but at this stage, there's something just about Canelio that I am pretty happy to go against him.
Okay, beautiful.
What about your thoughts?
I think Canelio snuck into the Oxlongs this morning when
Sounds like a few people snuck
when I posted the thing.
So
I made some tweaks, didn't I? I'm never happy. With those forwards, for me, there's going to be some chopping and changing. As the preseason goes as well. I'm just indecisive at the best of times as well, so that certainly doesn't help me this time of year. He's in there at the moment. Will he be at the end? Not sure.
Yeah. So I think that obviously 4 out of the first top 5, or 5 out of the top
Forwards, are they?
4 out of the top 5 are forwards in terms of most popular players, so very interesting there. Let's move on to the next 2. I want to go through these guys maybe a bit quicker because I think they're a little bit more harder to argue against.
Yeah,
Rowan Marshall and Tom Mitchell. Start with Rowan Marshall. The only thing, obviously, if we see Tom Campbell named in that round 1
I thought
side.
you meant just if you see him at all. If we sight
spot
Tom
him
Campbell
out on the street, just I don't know.
Do not pick Rowan Marshall if Tom Campbell's anywhere in the vicinity.
Yeah. So Rowan Marshall, look, of all the reports, especially with some of the reports with Darcy Cameron and Tim English carrying a couple of soft tissue injuries or issues at the moment, Rowan Marshall seems maybe he's like the last man standing. So 34% owned. Look, if he's named as a sole ruck in round 1, I think you don't overthink it.
Do not bet against him.
And you put him in there.
Yeah, same.
Tom Mitchell, I think similar idea.
We said this on the previous pod with Tom Mitchell. Because of his price, you're not betting against him. If he's
cheap.
Yeah, if you don't pick him, okay, and he does well, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Okay, if you pick him, everyone else has him if he does poorly. So it's a no-brainer. Don't bet against Tom Mitchell.
Yeah, and even if he does poorly, he's not the kind of type that's going to lose money or sort of like he's going 100. I think that's locked that in.
I think so.
And it's just a matter of how high can he go.
Yeah.
And I think that just based on the time of ground, that stuff that dropped, the CBAs that dropped, I do expect him to be at least a 105 midfielder, which for me is a good pick at his price.
What about
another ruckman, Timmy English?
Yeah, what about English?
I guess the report here that we'll touch on just briefly is, was it an adductor thing that he was getting looked at? I don't necessarily know the extent of the injury or the little knock or whatever it is. So maybe just something to monitor at this stage.
Yep.
And the other thing about Tim English is obviously over 900,000. Could you save some money and go with something maybe a bit cheaper?
Yep. Well, you save essentially 100k by going Rowan Marshall, and of the two of them,
180k to go to Darcy Cameron.
If both of those roles are locked in, then I'm Marshall over English.
I think so.
Any day of the week.
Yeah, me too.
And you save 100k. So monitor the health and monitor the role on Marshall's front. There's definitely plenty of people out there advocating for Tim English. I think we got a couple of comments that said, hang on, where's Tim English?
Yeah.
I
obviously, it's a very valid selection.
Oh, definitely.
And,
definitely.
I had him as my first pick player when the game opened. But
you did. You did.
I think, obviously, there's 3 really good options, in my opinion. Darcy Cameron, Rowan Marshall, and Tim English.
Yeah.
Based on if they're all healthy. And I think you could go with all 3 and have Cameron in your forward line. I personally, that's not the kind of the way that I'm leaning. But of course, obviously, you've got to make your choice and pick 2 out of the 3 there. So it will be a very interesting call. Obviously, all of those rucks are kind of in a similar kind of range in terms of ownership. So no clear front runner as of yet. I expect maybe Marshall might get there if we see no ruck in the round 1 team. But I think monitor his health, and I think that's something that we've all going to just kind of make our own mind up with those rucks.
Definitely.
Toby McLean, 31%, highest owned mid-pricer, you could say.
Don't bet against him.
Don't bet against him?
Don't bet against him. You may have a different opinion on this, but I just think...
Is he locked into their side? Is he locked into their best 22?
It's a good question. I find it hard to believe that you would pick a guy that hasn't played all season for a final. He comes out and has 9 tackles, and then next year you say, that's not the kind of guy we want out there. Do you know what I mean?
You lose Dunkley, you lose Lockie Hunter.
And if I was Toby McLean, I'd be like, bro, I came out, I played 1 game, I had 9 tackles, I tried to put the boys on my back. Like, if he's unfit, maybe, but in terms of just the type of player that he is, I'm like, get in my team. You know what I mean? Like, he's the kind of guy you want in your team. So
I agree. Just sort of floating the question down
there. No, that's
there.
good. Play devil's advocate for sure.
And the only other thing I would say is the role. Like, is he...
But at that price...
Yeah,
you pretty much
there's a few good forward rookies. That you could save 100, 150,000. And if they're playing a similar role... I mean, McLean's obviously done it before, and he's got the runs on the board.
Well, you could pick him as a midfielder then, if you wanted.
You could put him in your midfield.
You've got... Let's say across midfield and forward, you've probably got 6 on-field rookie spots, 5 on-field rookie spots.
5. I think 6 would be too many. You probably got 4 or 5.
Okay, so you got 4 or 5. I think he finds a spot in there. I mean, at 401,000, he could pretty much lace up the boots and score that. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I think he's a great value option this year. But I like that you're playing devil's advocate.
Yeah,
he's in your team.
He's in my team. He is in my team. So I think there are a few other options as well around that price.
Okay.
Wayne Miller, Taron Thomas. I know they're dirty names. I know they've disappointed
You're making
in the
me
past.
cringe. And didn't Taron have another misdemeanor?
There's a few things going on with him in the news at the moment right now. So a little bit unclear as to how that will actually affect him. But if we stick strictly to footy sense, you can't necessarily rule them out just yet. But McLean does look like the safest and best option of all of them at the moment. So I think, and again, it's kind of low risk with the price. So
it is.
You're not necessarily going against him by
worst case scenario, he gets a crap roll, he scores around that mark, and you downgrade to a rookie, and it's like you've solved that problem.
Next highest mid-pricer, the Warpedo. James Warple.
Was the Warpedo the one that we were talking about that had that unaffected?
The 10, yeah.
The 10.
The 10.
Sorry, James.
So
Sorry.
This, to me,
it's not happening.
Screams of danger. Like, I know that there's been good reports in the preseason.
Yeah, but you want to go against him, right?
Oh, I want to go against him.
Okay, yeah.
See, like, if you're selecting him, this screams of this could go bad.
Reeks
quickly.
of danger.
Yeah.
10.
Look, he's averaged 97 before.
He has.
He's priced at 45, 50.
Give him his props.
So look, if he comes out and puts out his best season, he could potentially be 40 points unders. I get that, but all we can do is go off like the most recent data. When you have an uninjured score of 10 in your books with 35% CBAs. Look, there's a lot of danger there. You come out in round one, you give me a 30 price at 463k. Like
that's a spray off of that.
That's you're trading that straight away, and you're already behind the 8 ball.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a guy that if he's cheap enough that if he starts like a house on fire, you can still get him in.
That's true.
It's not
There's
too
still
late.
Value. Yeah.
So for me, I'm very much in favour of not starting with Warple. I just think that the downside is outweighing the upside, in my opinion. And the fact that he's 29% owned, I think that it's a pretty decent gamble to leave him off your side in the hopes that he does disappoint early and you've got to jump on the rest of the comp. And for me personally, I'd much rather have like an extra rookie on my field than having a Warple there, save 200,000 and spend that elsewhere in my side.
Yeah.
Or if you're choosing him over a Dom Sheed, like give me Sheed any day of the week.
Yeah.
And I think he's a good one to go against, I reckon.
That's it. So, and for context, so he's valued at 460k. So save 60k at the moment. Get Toby McLean. There's not really. I don't think there's a room for two of those guys in your side. And for me, it's McLean at 60k less at the moment.
Yeah, you could say more midfield time role for Warple, but like he's had opportunity in the last couple of seasons. If I flick over to their last season, I believe he was in the CBAs. So last year, 47%, like he was in there, 47%, and he's priced at what he put up essentially. He did have an injury affected game in there, but that floor is very scary. So how much upside is there? There is upside, I will say that, but it's fraught with danger in my opinion. So
sorry, James.
I think it's one you can go against.
It's not happening. Next bloke up, yo.
Elliot Yo, the Yo man. He is someone that I'm coming around to actually.
Yeah, you weren't initially.
I was a little bit skeptical.
You were.
Early on. He reminds me, and this is probably just the way I thought about it last season, but he reminds me very much of like a George Hewitt type of last year.
Yeah.
I was initially kind of not keen on Hewitt because of, he had never been a great fantasy scorer before, even though he was going to have the role. Yo has obviously had big seasons, but those seasons came in better sides for West Coast when they're a premiership team. So he's averaged over 100 before. The thing that has got me really interested in him, and probably someone that you can go against him and hope that the body breaks down, but I think that the scoring is going to be there. The fact that he's going to be splitting time between the midfield and defence really intrigues me. There's not a lot of players that go midfield to defender.
No.
It's usually a mid-forward kind of split or pure mid-wing. Mid-defence, I think, is a very sounds like a very friendly role. So if he's mixing up CBAs with kick-ins, so there's a lot of easy points on up front there.
I agree. I won't be betting against Yo, Mitch. If Yo doesn't make it in the team, it's not because I'm betting against him. It's just because I've restructured in some other way.
Yeah.
But if you do choose to bet against him, you're essentially betting on injury, aren't you?
It's injury,
You know
I think,
yeah.
is probably the biggest thing you're betting against. Maybe it's the fact that you think the Eagles are going to be still really, really bad and that Yo isn't capable of scoring at his best in a poor side, which is a possibility. Yeah. So, 26% rostered.
He's at a good price for. I think a lot of people are playing around with their defence at the moment, and he's in a nice price for when you want to do some different things in defence. So
he does have the potential to be like sort of a season-defining pick in a good way or a bad way. Like he could easily be in the top 6 discussion, and if you're starting at 625,000, that's an amazing pick there. But like you said, the body is the big concern. If he injures himself in round 2, and if you've gone against that, you're a step ahead of the rest of the competition in that regard. So I usually tend to not go against somebody because they've historically been injured. If they've had a good preseason and it's all clear from that front, to again credit Josh Lloyd, the fancy basketball guru. You're injury prone until you're not. You're an Iron Man until you're not. Yeah. And if you've had a good preseason, I think that you bank the scores, you bank the value, and if injury comes your way, you deal with it then. So that's my personal view. But I think that there is a legitimate reason you could go against Yo.
This next fella I know you're betting against.
Yeah, James Sicily. Yeah. I am still really surprised that he is this highly owned. 26%. What is that?
The narrative there.
So he's the second highest premium defender behind Daicos, which really surprised me.
Yeah, I think the narrative, you'll agree, is that Hawthorn are maybe not going to be great. The ball's going to spend a lot of time down there, and he's the big dog down there, and he's going to have the ball. So that I mean, I tend to agree with. I just don't know whether it's enough that his scoring improves enough to make it a justified decision. I think there's better value guys in the back line.
I think people sort of, you highlight your Aaron Halls, you highlight your Zeebles when he was back in defence, both obviously for North Melbourne when they were a poor side. And you can use that to boost your justification. For me, I would label Sicily much more of an actual defender than those two. Someone who actually has a bit more of a role in terms of manning up on a player.
He's inclined to actually play football sometimes.
Yeah, he's not just screaming for the ball every 10 seconds. So he does that too, obviously, and he's a great player. And I understand the idea of the ball being down there, but you still have to possess the footy. You still have to control the ball movement and have it on your terms a little bit to rack up those points. And I think there is a significant risk that he is playing a bit more of an accountable role this season. Am I right in saying that he's the captain? Or have Hawthorn haven't decided yet?
I'm not sure. Definitely in the conversation if it hasn't already been decided. Now, so I'm going against Sicily as well, but let's play devil's advocate. We know the bloke has a ceiling, so he comes out in round 1 and he knocks out a 150. What are you doing?
I don't think it changes my opinion really too much.
Okay. So it wouldn't be a panic trade?
No, I don't think so, because he's a guy that I don't expect his role to be dramatically different. So if someone comes out and does that, and they're maybe a young up-and-coming player, and there's something that I've seen that I haven't seen before, or there's a role change that I didn't expect, that's when I could make those pounce moves. But when it's an established player like James...
I like that, mate.
Yeah, pounce.
Work that in there.
When it's a player like Sicily, throw me off here. When there's a player like Sicily we know what he does, you know what I mean? Like he is what he is. Look, he very might well have a few 150s throughout the season, but I also expect that he might have a few 60s and 70s. So for me, that kind of a score round 1 wouldn't make me pounce.
I don't know if I can get behind this, mate. I'm not sure about the pounce. Actually, no, I've changed my mind. I like the pounce. Okay. I like the pounce.
Quick turnaround. All right, let's go on to the next guy, Darcy Cameron,
keep it going.
Who seemed to hurt his hamstring today at training, is the reporting.
I didn't really have a chance to have a look at my phone today. This one come through on a text message to us.
So I've seen it along on Twitter. Came off the ground, sort of looking a bit ginger. Was held out of the match sim later on in that training session, having his hamstring rubbed down a little bit. So no reports on how serious it is at this stage, or whether it's a proper strain or the old dreaded hamstring awareness. Which seems to be...
It's the worst when they're aware of their hamstrings, isn't it? But see, this is a little scary to me, because so I wouldn't bet against Darcy Cameron in my opinion, prior to this news. But let's say that this news comes out, hamstring 3 weeks, whatever it is. I'm starting to pack my DAX a little bit, because the only other option that I can see as viable is English Marshall. and then
We're out of good options, aren't we?
And then we're out of cash too.
Yeah, shit, yeah. So,
we got no money to spend after that. So I really hope that it's just him being aware of his hamstrings and not that there's anything wrong with them.
You've also got the man with the goggles as well. Apparently, is there's been talk that they're going to share the ruck duties again this season.
I don't want to hear that.
Not what we want to hear.
No, I don't want to hear that. Take the goggles off, Mason.
Take the goggles off. Take the boots off too, mate. Don't get on the ground.
That would work too.
But I'm less confident in Darcy Cameron now than I might have been a week ago.
It's amazing.
Look, the rucks and defenders to me just
doing
tough.
Your head in a bit.
Yeah, they're tough at the moment.
Sleepless nights.
I'm flicking backwards and forwards and playing around, like I said before, with like a Daicos down to a Yo, going really cheap in my defence.
And then to
get to an English is something that I've played around with.
Okay, you've been keeping that quiet, mate.
Yeah, well, it's
gotta have some secrets.
Nothing set in stone, right?
Yeah.
English might, obviously you might have done as a doctor. Who knows? Darcy Cameron do his ACL. Who knows? Touch wood.
Poor Darcy.
Sorry, mate. Let's move on. We'll go through these next few guys because there's a player I want to get to real quickly.
I think I know who you want to get to.
Let's talk about Took Miller. 25% owned in the comp.
Took.
Again, one of the highest owned midfielders, one of the highest owned midfield premiums. I think he is probably the highest owned out-and-out Uber premium in midfield at 25%, which, is a bit interesting.
So I don't know what it was, but the other day when I was playing around, I'd worked it so that I got Took to M1, and then it just... For whatever reason, I couldn't describe it, but it just didn't feel right, and I found 7K and I went and got Steele it.
Yeah, I feel the same thing too. Like I was trying to split the hairs between Steele and Took earlier in the season, and I just feel way more confident with Steele at the moment than I do with Took. I think he's someone that obviously he's got the huge ceiling, but he seems like much more of a tag target compared to a Steele type. The game plan and game style of Gold Coast did change from 2021 to 2022, and perhaps that's just the reason why he's 110 kind of a guy. And I still expect him to be a top 8, probably a top 4 or 5 midfielder, but I don't know if I necessarily see the 120 ceiling in Took compared to a Steele, which I do still see that ceiling there.
For clarity, I wouldn't bet against Took.
Obviously not.
He might not be in my team, but does that mean I'm betting against him? No.
I don't think he's gonna. It's not gonna be a pick that blows up in your face and burns you. I don't believe. And he's got that very unique round. Is it 13 bye?
Yeah, so
it's
just
just
him and
Geelong. I think it is.
Yeah. Or Gold Coast and Geelong.
Gold Coast and Geelong.
Not just him.
Yeah, he's the only relevant one really. So again, I still don't really know how that's going to play out, but. Maybe that's a string in his bow, but again, it does surprise me that he's higher owned than some of those other guys, and by a decent margin. Let's move on to this next guy here.
Is this the guy you wanted to get to?
Yeah, Sam bloody Doherty. Roy, if you're watching,
I'm a bit sheepish now. Literally.
Look, I know he wasn't in my team, and that was a deliberate decision. A lot of people are saying that Doc is Doc the Lock, right? It's
the Lock. I haven't heard that.
Doc the Lock. He's a must-have. He's a no-brainer.
Big rhyming guys. Wow.
And, he's training the mids. Everyone loves the more midfield time.
But for him, Is that
a good thing for Doc?
Well, it's not a bad thing, but I don't get... If people are out there going, he's getting more mid-time, you've got to get him in.
10-plus points upside.
What do you mean?
He's already averaging 110.
Yeah, he's a gun off half back. So don't turn that on me and say, suddenly he's a lock. If you think he's a lock, you probably just think he's a lock because he's so good that his value might not dip. So I mentioned it right off the bat, was that the reason that I tweaked a few things and got on the bandwagon this morning was because I can definitely see a world where he just comes out, does his thing, and then suddenly you're like, hang on a second, Sam Doherty hasn't dropped in value, and I need to find a way to get the $1 million man in my team. Yeah. And then you're up the creek without a paddle, aren't you? So
he is that kind of a type. He's kind of similar in Dunkley in that way in terms of he's pretty clearly the top player in his line.
Yep.
And I think that. Yeah, that's a good question. How old is he? He is 29.
Okay. I was going to say this could change the whole conversation.
Yeah, it could rule him right out. So he's 29. Obviously, the narrative is also a preseason under his belt last year.
Yep.
Obviously, had a very interrupted preseason. Did start slower. Came home like a steam train. Last two games when he did move into the midfield, 123 and 137. I will say, though, that 137 came against the Collingwood Magpies, which we knew very well they were the easiest team to score against for midfielders. The Demons also are a team that they don't tag, really, because their midfielders go up against your guys. Yep. The thing I do like about him in the midfield, different to a Short and a Crisp, is that he showed high tackle numbers, so 10 tackles and 7 tackles in both those games. So if he is in the midfield, I think it's not a negative thing, but I would argue the fact that I don't see it giving him this extra ceiling about him because, like I said, he's already averaging 110.
That's what
There's
I disagree
only few midfielders that have averaged 110.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's the bit I disagree with, is people who are going, oh, he's going in the midfield, you're going to get this kind of upside. If you're picking him, you're not picking him because he's got upside. You're picking him because you think he might be unattainable later in the season.
See, this is where my philosophy is. Like, I think the only reason that you should pick him is if you see him going 115 plus.
So you see Dunkley? So because let's say
110's not enough for me. Like, even though if he is clearly the best defender, there's no value in that. And even if you're 10 points, if you pick, say, a Brayshaw and he's a flat 100 and you're 10 points behind, people say if you wait till round 12 to get him in, there's 120 points. But the difference is I've saved money. I've saved $100,000 and I've spent that somewhere else. Yeah. And hopefully I've used that money well, and that's where I make the difference. Instead of paying money for 110, I've paid money for 110 and got 120, if that makes sense. Like, if that affords me to get a Jack Steele in my side, if that affords me to get Dunkley or something like that, and they go better than their price, then that's where I get the leg up.
I'll be really intrigued to see how it plays out, particularly with Doc and Dunkley, because those are the guys, they're just below $1 million, and it's really, a lot of people's seasons will hinge on if you start with them and they maintain that, then you're a guru. If you don't start with them and they maintain it, then exactly, how do you get there? Yeah. So I'm intrigued.
These kind of guys where you have to reserve a spot for them.
Yeah, they've got to be there at some point.
They have to be in your team at some point. So these kind of guys, I always eye off. If I don't have them by the bye rounds, they are someone that as soon as their bye comes around, I am doing whatever it takes to get them into my side, because that's when you've got the 2 down, 1 up. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter how expensive they are. You can usually get enough cash to get there. So that's kind of like at worst case scenario if he does start really well and never really drops in price. But if you do see a poor game here and there, and because he's priced so high, even just 1 or 2 poor games, it'll be enough to shoot his price down. Guys
are very unlikely to be getting above that $1 million during the season. That's very... The
way the magic number works,
exactly.
It starts extremely high.
Yeah, so if I was a betting man, I'd say their values could come down a little bit.
I don't think he ever reaches $1 million.
Yeah, well, put that down. So, but yeah, intriguing. What do we got next?
Let's we're going a bit longer here, so I want to maybe just touch on a couple of guys that I think are options to definitely go against. I will just want to highlight another midfielder here in Jackson Macrae, who, to be honest, I'm surprised he's not higher. He's owned in 18.5% of classic sides. I thought that he was going to be potentially the number 1 most popular midfielder in the comp because of just the history of his scoring. He's got pedigree,
doesn't he?
The Dunkley leaving. Maybe people are finally getting sick of his sooking on the wing. I don't know.
That's the narrative for sure.
I'm a bit anti-Macrae this season. I'm quite comfortable going against him this year. I just think that if you're the Bulldogs, the way that he plays, as good as he is and as clean as he is with his hands and his feet, just the pace at which he plays the game, I think that if you're the Bulldogs, you want to try and switch it up a little bit and go with the Bonts, go with the Bailey Smiths, and have that more aggressive attacking kind of style. Yeah. And I think that he's underpriced, but I don't think he's underpriced enough that with those other options around him, I think that I don't know if I see him as a top 8 mid this season.
Yeah, from like a tactical perspective, you talk about wanting those explosive attacking mids. I don't really see a team that will put 3 explosive attacking forward running mids into their centre bounce at once. So there is still
breathe in there.
Yeah, so there is still room, for Macrae to be.
He'll be in
there. CBAs.
Yeah.
But I am, for the most part with you. I think internally he might just be rated a little bit more highly than what we see on the outside, because we see the bomb, we see the flowing mullet, we see these things. So, yeah, don't be shocked if he comes out and goes big. But for me, he's probably not in the team because...
just better options.
Yeah, better options and just a little bit, I think, of that Suki narrative I'd buy into too.
Yeah, look, he is the kind of a guy that you see him in the preseason, you remember his 120 seasons, and you go, oh,
So
Macrae,
tempting.
I'll get him back my team.
Well, see,
so I could definitely see that number rising.
Isn't it right that you never had him, and then the season you jumped on,
last season,
yeah,
man,
so that
I
was the
finally
first
got him
season
in.
you jumped on, hey? And you've been outside looking in the whole time, and then
I've
you got
always
burnt.
kind of gone against him just because I don't necessarily love the way he goes about it. And look, he is a good player, and he's the perfect kind of AFL fantasy guy where he's never copping a tag really, and he's someone that gets a lot of that easy uncontested possessions. He's in their high percentage of the CBAs. So look, I think he's obviously going to be a good pick. I don't necessarily see him going down in price, but I just see the opportunity elsewhere in terms of a few other guys that are his price or cheaper that I just like a bit more. So I was surprised to see him under 20% owned. I thought he'd be close to that, like Tom Mitchell, 30% kind of a mark personally, just before the game opened. But just thought that one was interesting. Okay. Is there anyone else that you particularly wanted to touch on?
Not particularly. I mean, there's a couple of fellas down there that I won't be starting with, that I'll be going against, but they're kind of getting down into kind of like the 15% owned.
You probably can't really call them super popular players
That's
anymore.
it. It wouldn't be like a huge I'm going against that guy. So I think we've kind of summed up. If there is anyone that you specifically thought, I wish the boys talked about, and you want to bring their name up on Twitter or YouTube, like we can always comment and talk about those guys. But yeah.
Yeah, that'll do it for us today, talking about the popular players. So next podcast, we're going to go through some pods, some points of difference. Now, again, I know I've talked about in the past, don't pick a point of difference just for the sake of being a point of difference. So this podcast will be guys that I truly actually believe in that just happen to be under 10% owned. So these are the guys that I think that even if they were, the most popular players, I'd still be looking at them. So stay tuned for that podcast next. Hoping to get, fingers crossed, a couple of some other people joining the podcast soon as well to talk about some maybe different opinions and lots of other cool, exciting things happening this preseason. So again, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel. Give us a big thumbs up over there, and we'll catch you guys next time. Bye.